There are many drugs, therapies, and self-help techniques out there to help us try and calm the ever-increasing high-paced struggles of the modern world. Most of these methodologies have a common denominator, that they hope to trigger certain parts of our nervous system to establish some type of cohesive balance within ourselves. And that cohesive balance is the harmony between the different parts of our entire nervous system. Our body's nervous system can be classified into two broad categories. The first one is the central nervous system, which is primarily consisted of the brain and the spinal cord, and the second one, which is the peripheral nervous system, which consists of both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. In general, the sympathetic nervous system is responsible for the fight or flight or active aspect of our nervous system, and the parasympathetic nerve is responsible for the rest, digest, and relax or passive part of our nervous system. Within the parasympathetic nervous system is a major nerve called the vagus nerve. And it is what we want to draw our attention to in order to help find one of the most natural and yet simple methods in attaining cohesive harmony between our body's entire nervous system. The word vagus is Latin for the wanderer, because this nerve literally wanders the entire body, connecting to practically all major organs throughout it. It originates in the brainstem as the 10th cranial nerve and bifurcates downwards through the neck, connecting the lungs, heart, passing through the diaphragm, wrapping around the kidneys and liver, and throughout the entire intestinal tract down to the colon. This single nerve is so important that it modulates smiling, swallowing, vocalization, breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, hormonal secretion, intestinal function, bowel movements, and much more. So it stands to reason that a faulty functioning vagus nerve causes a whole host of undiagnosable problems, usually escaping proper diagnosis even from the best modern medical science. Now, the vagus nerve has two major parts, the ventral or the front and the dorsal or the rear part. Most of the aforementioned functioning of the vagus nerve are associated with the ventral or front part of the vagus nerve. There is, however, a noteworthy theory among neurologists and psychologists who study polyvagal theory, that's the study and theorization of the vagus nerve, that the rear or dorsal part of the vagus nerve, when triggered by extreme or constant stimuli, is associated with a deep freeze or a playing of the dead type mechanism within our nervous system, which is probably the basis for deep-rooted trauma commonly known as post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. This happens because the dorsal part of the vagal nerve doesn't cease to stay active when freezing or playing dead after experiencing extreme stimuli, and therefore keeping the victim in a psychological daze exhibited as depression, anxiety, nervousness, speechlessness, confusion, and all sorts of troubling psychosomatic behavior. The ventral vagal response is mediated by the neocortex, or the conscious higher part of the brain, while the dorsal vagal response is mediated by the reptilian brain, which is the unconscious survival part. Ancient practices such as yoga have shown that certain practices can in fact enable conscious control of both parts of our vagus nerve, which is something modern science has just begun to rediscover. The vagus nerve is responsible for the so-called gut feeling we get about things and is probably activated by our premonitions through the neocortex, since science has established that the neocortex, which is the higher brain, is connected to the ventral vagus nerve. This notion takes us into an interesting speculative territory on the idea of what could be considered psychic powers, which really means to say our ability to tune into our body's higher natural mechanisms. Some ancient scriptures deal with this very idea in detail, such as Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, the Kundalini Upanishad, and the Vajrayana of the Tibetan Buddhism. The nadis, as they are dubbed, are psychic currents whose two major currents are called Ida, or the moon, and Pingala, which is the sun, merely referencing both the left and right nostril respectively and their association with the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system respectively. Many of these scriptures give numerous examples on what type of techniques ought to be implemented in order for one to not only experience physiological optimization, but also by harmonizing our entire nervous system to such an extent as to reach conscious states of unadulterated interconnectivity. Something which would be considered by normal people as a psychic experience, usually achievable only through psychotropic drugs. Now, I did a video on how the CIA had verified certain psychic powers, such as moving physical objects through physical walls, which I'll link in the description below, so I don't want to talk about that too much here. But I would like to mention another notable example on how conscious control of our nervous system can be viewed as psychic powers, as performed by a yogi named Swami Rama. In the 1970s, Swami Rama demonstrated, among many other things, that he was able to control his heart to the point of complete cessation for nearly half a minute, and claimed that he could do so up to about 7 minutes, only to snap out of it as if nothing abnormal had happened. In fact, Swami Rama himself said that siddhas, or psychic powers, are concomitant in the learned control over the inner functions. Now, it is highly unlikely that any of us are going to be able to consciously stop and start our hearts anytime soon, but the point here is to demonstrate the incredible feats our mind are capable of with the proper type of technique and practice. Now, if the importance of the vagus nerve has not yet dawned on you, let's try a few very basic examples and techniques to activate your vagus nerve. Among the dozens of exercises that the Polyvagal Theory suggests to stimulate the vagus nerve, which are really just repackagings of ancient techniques, we have gargling, cold showers, exercise, coffee enemas, massages, shaking the body, and to a lesser extent, humming and or singing, positive social relationships, and relaxing. The last one's pretty obvious. But the three most potent exercises should be without surprise, and that's meditation, diaphragmic breathing, and direct vagal stimulation by deliberate stretching. And in this example, it's going to be our neck. For this example, our meditation will be given focus both on the diaphragmic breathing while stretching the neck muscles. Start by sitting in a posture where your back, neck, and head are all in a straight line. I like to sit in Vajrasana because it helps me stay very straight without any effort, but you can literally sit in any position so long as your back, neck, and head are all vertical. Now in breathing, make a conscious and deliberate effort to use your abdominal muscle to really push and pull the diaphragm in and out. Visualize the neck muscle loosening as you tilt it and help stretch it a little bit with the hand of the side of the head is stretching towards. And go as far as you comfortably can, possibly even to the point where there's very mild pain. Hold this position for about 10 seconds while retaining the stomach inwardly as much as possible. Then, exhale, tilt your head straight, breathe normally again, and tilt it the opposite direction. Share your experience in the comment section below and feel free to ask any questions. We've all heard the age-old adage of know thyself and you shall know the universe. And perhaps it is through these types of practices which we'll begin to know ourselves and ultimately our extension with the cosmos.